on migrants and displaced persons amid COVID-19, issues, challenges, and policy options, organized by Mahatma Gandhi University in collaboration with Department of Social Sciences, Flames University Pune, and Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, New Delhi. So the theme for today's session is issues of displaced and refugees amid COVID-19. So with us, we have Dr. Shahina Mol AK to chair the session. Dr. Shahina Mol AK is the Assistant Professor and Head of Department, PG Department of English, KAHM, Unity Women's College. Ma'am has done PhD in Refugee Literature with special focus on area studies of Middle East women narratives. She also has specializations in the Fourth World Literature, Eco-Critical Studies, Refugee Studies, and Area Studies. A hearty welcome to you, ma'am. So without further delay, let's move to the keynote session addressed by Dr. Parivelan KN. I request all the attendees to post your questions in the chat section, which will be discussed after the presentation. And I hand over the session to Dr. Shahina Mol AK.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Krishna. May I know whether I am audible or not?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
And visible too, I hope.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well. Okay, so Honorable Speaker of the session, Dr. Parivelan KM, coordinators of the 3-day international webinar, led by Dr. Lirar, Dr. Smita, Dr. Divya, with the organizing team from MGU University, Flame University, and GFRDT, and wonderful delegates of the session, dignitaries, and dear participants. Good morning, everyone. As Ms. Krishna has rightly pointed out, after the successful deliberations of the first and second day, we have moved to the third and final day of our international webinar on refugees, forced migrants, and the displaced among COVID-19. Let me appreciate the organizing team for taking such a kind of bold, at the same time, right thematic event in the right time for addressing the issues, concerns, and policies associated with the most vulnerable group of the world. Especially, I came to understand from the last day's lecture that the talk is particularly attending the issues of vulnerable communities, not simply looking at the regional effect, but at the same time, regional, state level, national, and international effects and factors have been discussed and deliberated most appropriately by this wonderful webinar. It's indeed, it gives me pleasure to be the part of this program. And since I'm a person who is looking at the shape of life amidst geopolitical, social factors of area, I have particular interest to be the part of this program since, as we understand, place-space conundrum is always affecting lives, irrespective of COVID-19 or pandemic, irrespective of the geopolitical conditions of lives. As we understand the patterns and shapes of life, we see that the place-space conundrum is always affecting in multiple forms upon the individuals. Now, when we particularly look at COVID-19 as a pandemic and when it affects the vulnerable lives of people, irrespective of the borders, we see that a certain kind of spatiality and temporality is always affecting the lives. And when we understand COVID-19 particularly, we can see that a kind of mobility and immobility is together acting upon individuals. Why do I say mobility and immobility acting and reacting upon individuals? Since you are all researching on refugees as well as displaced persons and forced migrants in the midst of COVID-19, as it is deliberated by the 2-3 day sessions, we see that in one way, these displaced persons, refugees and migrants are always branded as mobile persons. They are all moving. They are moving India, moving countries, moving nations, moving mobile persons. At the same time, the mobility that they were cursed upon is in a way affected during the time of COVID-19. As we see, not only regionally, in the regional borders, state borders, as well as the international borders, the people who have been tagged as mobile people have been suffering issues in connection with immobilities. So they are mobile people at one end, at the same time, a kind of immobility or unable to move have been accustomed upon them due to the socio-political, geographical factors as well as the economical factors. So this is where the webinar is particularly becoming most important when we look at the mobile, immobile reactions upon the individuals, especially upon the vulnerable individuals, about whom much of the policies are to be redrafted. Okay, and at the same time, we can also see that when these factors affect people, not only spatially but also temporally, this has to be addressed with the most extreme academic interest as well as the law making as well as the policy making. So this is where we have been deliberating on refugees, forced migrants, and the displaced among COVID-19 issues and policies. So in a way, as we all see, a kind of force of ejection, a kind of centripetal force is acting upon the individuals. A kind of force of ejection is there. They're all always part of the ejection. A kind of ejection is happening. At the same time, there is another factor which make you immobile, a kind of lockdown. You look at the chemistry as well as the politics of lockdown. You have been stuck within the homes. But when we speak about those people who have no homes, where they will be stuck and what is the space in which they can be in. So the spatiality at the same time, the temporality affected by the COVID-19 pandemic together affects on the individuals by which they are going to be simply immobile matters. Immobile matters, when I use the term matters in terms of physics, you are just becoming immobile bodies. At one end, you want to be the part of mobility, you want to get at your home place, a kind of imaginary homeland, especially in the case of these people, there is no homeland actually. So you want to be the part of homeland at one end. At the same time, there are factors, political factors and geographical factors, as well as economic factors, which make you stuck. So stuck at the borders. Okay, you can simply look at the things happen in Kerala, the things happen in some other states. We could see long lines of people who have been urging to get to their home place. So there were displaced persons within the regions, within the state, within the nation, as well as globally at one end. At the same time, politically things act and react upon them to turn them as immobile beings. So this is where we have, and there are a lot of other overtones also. Gender overtones are there. At the same time, economic overtones are there. Political overtones are there. So this is where a kind of theorization is already lacking in the field of refugee studies as well as displaced studies. And there are some theories, but they are improper as well as incapable to address all the issues associated with these people. So that is why it is one of the hot academic areas still. And this is where the webinar is going to be the most important thing. So first of all, let me again appreciate the organizing team for taking such a kind of most valuable theme at this point, so that we can expect that the research as well as the academia will be looking at the more capacities as well as opportunities to frame the policies as well as to make government aware of something which can be done in this course. So I'm not elongating my speech. I'm here, joining with this session. We have the keynote address by the most celebrated, reputed speaker of this. Parivelan KM sir is with us, and he needs no introduction. And we also have been the part of one international webinar last year from Kerala University. Dr. Parivelan sir is quite important figure in this area, not only nationally, but also internationally. And for your understanding, let me just introduce him. Dr. Parivelan KM serves as a chairperson and associate professor at Nodal Center of Excellence for Human Rights Education and Center for Statelessness and Refugee Studies, School of Law, Rights and Constitutional Governance, Tata Institute of Social Science, TIS Mumbai. And previously, he had served at the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. Those who are working in this area will be very much aware of UNDP for facilitating the post-tsunami recovery, and at the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR, and facilitating the voluntary repatriation of Sri Lankan refugees as part of the peace process. And moreover, we could see that he also briefly served at Pondicherry Central University and Puducherry and Jamia Millia Central University also, and in New Delhi respectively. And moreover, his research as well as teaching interests include refugees, protection, as well as policy advocacy, statelessness issues, international humanitarian lawmaking, human rights education in India, policy and practices in disaster management, climate change and environmental governance in India, and access to justice and ethnicity and conflict resolution. So a brief bio of Dr. Parivelan sir will tell you that he's the right person to address these kinds of issues, especially when we are organizing, the team is organizing an international webinar on exclusively on vulnerable communities amid COVID-19. So with wholehearted pleasure, let me invite Dr. Parivelan KM sir to do the keynote address for this third day of our 3-day international webinar. With much pleasure, let me invite all the dignitaries, the delegates who have joined here with much enthusiasm. Last 2 days, I have been observing the much active Q&A session, and it's interestingly going in a very smooth way. So let me welcome each and everyone to be the part of the session, and with an extended hearty welcome, let me invite our resource person to have the keynote, to deliver the keynote address. So Dr. Parivelan sir, the floor is yours. Thank you all. Hello.
Hello, ma'am. I guess there's some network issue. It will be
it's okay. Okay. Sir has joined. I could see him. Hello, Dr. Parivelan sir. Okay, so dear friends, nothing to worry. There is some technical glitch. Sir has joined us already. He'll be joining within seconds.
Yeah, he has joined. He's there.
Okay.
Can I? Yeah, am I audible? Hi. I think there is some.
Hi,
yeah,
sir.
yeah. Hi.
Yeah, nothing to worry, sir. It's been
there is some problem in my connection. I think it's restarting. Yeah.
It's okay, sir. There was no much delay.
Right.
So the floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much to the chair, Dr. Sahini Moy, for giving this kind introduction and an overview about this session. And at the outset, I would like to compliment and thank the organizers, the Mahatma Gandhi University, Department of International Relations and Politics, as well as the FLAME University. I thank all the organizers at the outset for organizing this and inviting me. Indeed, it's a pleasure to come in and share a bit of my thoughts on this very important issue, which we all are confronting. COVID as a context we have, and we are going to discuss the humanitarian issue, which is something grappling all of us. Well, I have 2 or 3 thoughts to share in a way that how do we look at in the COVID context, the most invisible and marginalized people, as it was mentioned by the chair, that how do we, look at the refugees and asylum seekers, or the stateless population, or even the internally displaced. I'm sure in the last 2 days, there has been a discussion on internal displacement and other external migrants as well, economic migrants. It's very important for us also to look at the various categories of people and ensure that we have a clear understanding of who they are, because they're very important to distinguish who is a refugee, who is a stateless person, who is asylum seeker, who is an internally displaced person. There are times that they all could get blurred and overlap with each other. There are sometimes multiple tags to a person. If you take the Rohingyas, they're sometimes stateless, they're sometimes refugees, they're sometimes combination of both. So you have these kind of complexities which are also emerging, which we need to keep in mind. One is on the terminologies and defining the group is very important. And then see overall what kind of policies and welfare we have, protection we have, and what are the challenges they face in the general times. And in particularly during the COVID times, how it becomes all the more challenging is what we are going to look at it, of course, as a context. I would like to place that we require probably 3 A's, that is the awareness, advocacy, and action. I'll come to each one of them and contextualize a bit later why we need a clear awareness and understanding of who they are and what. And second is about having a clear data and information we lack in order to do an informed or evidence-based advocacy. That becomes the second challenge. And third, of course, is action. How do you work towards or work with these marginalized and vulnerable groups? Of course, then we also need to define what is forced migration and then connect to these groups. In these years, World Refugee Day, the message from the United Nations in general and United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is that everyone can make a difference and every action counts. I think that is something important in terms of solidarity and understanding and empathy with the groups. Something that is very important. So every action, every thing makes difference is something was emphasized. And the pandemic has also put into test, in terms of what are the kind of systemic and systematic inequalities the refugees or asylum seekers or stateless population may face. That's something we need to keep in mind, and how we endeavor to work with them. And when refugees and stateless population themselves are vulnerable, but they are also in the forefront fighting the pandemic at one level wherever they are displaced, and they also end up becoming heroes. I will start with a very optimistic and an interesting incident which I came across when I was conversing with some occasion the Sri Lankan refugees. Some of them take the numbers and keep in touch. Somewhere around in March, early April, I was just getting a call from one of the refugees from the refugee camp from Tamil Nadu, the Sri Lankan refugee. And he was greeting me and telling me how things are in pandemic. I said, I'm more concerned about how you people are and what's happening. He said, we are all fine as usual. We are struggling and we are overcoming the challenges now. Pandemic, COVID has posed quite a bit of challenge. But he said when they saw the appeal from the chief minister, that there is a chief minister's fund which they are mobilizing for COVID. He said that even though we are very vulnerable, we have a hand-to-mouth existence, but still we wanted to participate in that. So we pulled in money around roughly with the camp of 200 families, somewhere around 10,000 rupees. And then they went to the district collectorate and then they handed over the check. So he was sharing that in a very humble manner, that we made our own contribution. I was very surprised that when when I asked him, why did you all did it, and the answer was that we wanted to do it because we want the people, the country, India has been hosting us, and in the moment of crisis, we thought that we will make our own humble contribution. That's something highlights the role they play, whatever, and then the resilience it tells us how resilient they are. And they may be economically or identity wise maybe very marginalized, but they would like to participate. I think this is one probable example, but there could be many more to show that how they are resilient and how they are also playing the role of heroes. I remember earlier during the post tsunami, again the refugees who lived in some of these coastal areas, in fact, were in the forefront helping the fisher folks who were affected due to the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004. That again was something tremendously interesting to see how they have an ability to give back and be part of the building back. That's something very important. We need to look at how they are and what we can do. So our every action counts is something important. I thought I'll recall when we did some events around the World Refugee Day. Now, we will come to what is forced migration and what are the categories, and particularly the refugees, what are the challenge they have. Now, the pandemic, as we all understand, everybody is affected and everybody is displaced. We have had so much about the internal migrants, their plight and their invisibility, and how they were quite marginalized. It exposed tremendously how what are the sufferings of internal migrants and suffering of various other people who are much vulnerable. And therefore the COVID also tries to bring in a context of what kind of mobility we have, what kind of an option we have. We know that these people, the refugees, asylum seekers, as we look at them, or a stateless population, they themselves require some amount of mobility to protect themselves, because we know the context that they are somebody who are persecuted at the first place, that they are their human rights violations, and then there are issues of persecution. This is why they flee from one place to another place, particularly they seek asylum in another country, and that is the context we all know we have. That's something very important. So the COVID itself could actually tremendously play the role of lack of mobility, lack of movement for protection. And when you have the citizens themselves are suffering in the COVID tremendously, what will happen to the people who are not recognized legally, who are not that becomes again challenging. We will come to that a little later, how in India again we have different kinds of refugee groups treated differently. That's something very important of course to ponder. And how does that COVID kind of pandemic could pose a tremendous challenge and erode the legal obligations vis-a-vis the protection? That's something again very important, that there are regression. The nation states across the world weren't very keen to take care of refugees. I contextualize that in a post-Cold War era, particularly from the early 90s, we saw a tremendous decline in interest towards refugees. The Cold War period at least gave an opportunity of geopolitics and other reasons, ideologies, and which played some role to give some impetus to refugee protection, refugee regime. And post-Cold War is one context I place that there was tremendously a decline. That's something a matter of concern. Even till today, there are reluctance among the nation states, particularly from the developed world. The global north does not bother the way they did between 50s to let's say late 80s. So from the 90s we saw this decline in a way which is very challenging. But on the other side, you have compounding of problems which triggers the forced migration scenario. So how globally we look at it, how regionally we may look at it from South Asian perspective, and how we may look at it from the national perspective is all very important. And of course, COVID is another dimension which is posing a lot of challenge and risk to the people. Just statistics, from the UNHCR, when we look at it, it shows that, it's almost around 80 million people officially recorded as people who were affected and displaced in a forceful manner, in an involuntary manner. As we know, forced migration is a phenomenon where the people are involuntarily displaced from one place to another, from the places of habitation and all that to other places. And it could be internal within, called IDPs, internally displaced persons, which are around 45, 46 million officially recorded by UNHCR alone. And the numbers could be much, much more. You have refugees, which are to the tune of almost 26 million refugees officially recorded, which includes the UNHCR mandate refugees, around 20.4 million, and 5.6 million of Palestinian refugees, who again linger in sort of uncertainty for a very long due to the geopolitics and other things in the West Asian region. We are aware of that. And there's never, there's never any sight of any solution for refugee crisis, Palestinian refugees. And you have other refugees, which the numbers keep increasing, particularly again the scenario in West Asia, particularly in Syria, or you may call the South Sudan, or the Venezuela. These are the things, flashpoints which we hear, besides the Darfur and other things for the last one and a half decade. You have these triggering which has been happening, and therefore the numbers are to the tune of 26 million refugees, asylum seekers of 4.2. And then you have also a category of statelessness, where they may not be essentially tagged as refugees, but somebody who is denied the nationality becomes the stateless population. They could be almost around 5.6 million to almost 10 million people, roughly mapped by UNHCR. There are challenges in terms of collecting data. The numbers could be even twofold, threefold more who are stateless. And we know internally within India how the post-NRC process in Assam alone triggered, almost 4 million people initially, then around 2 million later with the revised list, whatever. So you have a new challenge that, if somebody in your country, living in your country, either a citizen or otherwise, suddenly now you have done a process and declared that they don't belong here. And, when the neighboring country also says that they are not willing to take anybody, now that precisely brings in a context that they belong nowhere. And then that's a new dimension, which we are seeing, the statelessness, the ongoing, as well as the new addition. So these are all, in a context that we are looking at broadly, the gambit of forced migration, which could usually be triggered by conflicts. It could be triggered by, any kind of, development-induced displacement. It also could be due to reasons of natural disasters and other things. This is where we look at broadly the forced migration as a phenomenon, and it could be a continuous process of discrimination, human rights violations, persecutions. All this could be there. When we look at the statistics again from UNHCR, it is stating that nearly 85% of the people who are refugees or affected are hosted in the developing countries. Another statistic says that nearly about 73% of the population are just in the neighboring countries. If it is Sri Lanka, then India becomes the host. If it is Myanmar, then India becomes the host. If it is conflict in Iran, Pakistan becomes the host. If it is Syria, then Turkey or Lebanon, they become the host. So this is how they mapped. What does this say? That why does the majority of refugees are in the developing countries? This also, we need to, look into the dimension here about the, the nature of the refugee regime and protection regime we have at the global level. We have, the 1951 Convention on Status of Refugees and the 1967 Protocol, which is there since the post-World War II, which came up in 1951 precisely to address, the displacement and refugee issues within the European theater. And it was very Eurocentric at the time. And later, apparently, seeing the escalation and other issues there was a 67 protocol which said that this convention is applicable globally. There are two categories. There are countries which have signed the convention and protect people in a legal based way. There are countries which may not have signed, but yet they may be traditionally hosting refugees. Probably India may come under that, and there are many other developing countries which are generously hosting refugees, which we need to see. And many of them are very poor countries. Many of them are in the least developed countries. Yet beyond the capacity, they do host. That is something very important. But the point here is that, again, the burden is towards the global south, the developing countries which are hosting, and the global north, as I said, from the post-Cold War era, 90s, post-90s, have been kind of, doing a tokenism or a symbolic support they may do, and they may not. But there are exceptions again. You have, Germany and others who are Canada. They may come up genuinely and wanting to, play a role. So this itself, we have to keep in mind the division between the global north and global south, or the developed and developing countries. So the conflicts and issues are happening mostly in the developing countries, in the global south, and therefore the burden of hosting also happens, majority of them, which we need to keep in mind. Therefore, what are the if you look at the Myanmar Rohingya displacement, and the fact that 1 million plus have come into Bangladesh. Now that's something, a matter of concern. Bangladesh itself is grappling with a lot of issues of poverty, unemployment, and other issues which it in itself internally has. In spite of that, it is burdened with this 1 million plus population of Rohingyas who come in, and then there are huge camps in Cox's Bazar and other areas. Beyond the capacity, we know how the humanitarian organizations are working around the clock, and then trying to support Bangladesh in terms of things. So the question is, does a small country with a lot of fragility and vulnerability, does it have to take such huge numbers? Is a question which we can raise, and very difficult to answer. Who takes the responsibility? How does this work? Of course, one silver lining is this international community, the United Nations, have come forward, understood this issue in the last few years, which was neglected earlier, and then they now at least try to enter into some kind of a bilateral pact, one individually with Myanmar, the other one with Bangladesh, and then they're trying to bring some kind of a solution. And we know how complex it is, the Rohingya issue. It's not about just merely repatriating them to their Rakhine region, which is going to solve. There are a lot of other humanitarian diplomacy which may require to bring in a solution. We'll come to that a little later. So you also have, when you look at the statistics, nearly about 68–70% of the refugees today are emanating from just 5 countries which are conflict prone. We all know the Syria, Venezuela recently due to more of economic crisis, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar. These are the top 5 countries which trigger so much. When you look at little other statistics a bit, you have the other displacements by the country of origin. Besides what we said, we also have Somalia, you have Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, Iraq, Central African Republic. These are some of the countries which constitute a lot of displacement. And the host countries, when we look at it, interestingly, as we said, it's more from the global south or developing countries. You have Turkey, Colombia, Germany, Pakistan, Uganda, interestingly, United States, which again tries to build a lot of wall and other things, also tries to give a lot of support to asylum seekers, if not directly refugees. Sudan, Islamic Republic of Iran, Lebanon, Peru. These are some of these countries, which we see that they are hosting, a number of refugees. Now, if you look at the global scenario, to name a few very quickly, we all are familiar with the 1 decade plus Syrian conflict, which is a protracted one, which continues to push a lot of people, around the neighborhood, up to Europe. Also, the Syrian refugees knock the door, and they are quite badly affected and displaced due to the protracted conflict, as we know. South Sudan has been, made independent, but yet you have a huge displacement crisis. We have very currently seeing in the last few weeks the Azerbaijan and Armenian crisis, which is out there. Very unfortunate during the COVID period, you have that kind of a very huge scale of an outbreak, a war, and where the world community is trying to work towards addressing it, but it seems very complex that they are not able to mitigate in spite of some efforts made by Russia to mediate, and all that. Moscow talks are all not very effectively working on the ground. You have similarly the conflict within Ukraine, the arrival of refugees and migrants into Europe, the massive flow of stateless refugees from Myanmar to Bangladesh to other countries as well, neighborhood, the Venezuelan refugees and outflow into other Latin American and Caribbean countries, the Sahel region in Africa, where there is a kind of an issue of conflict as well as climate, which is also posing a lot of challenge in terms of resources and access to resources, which is a new dimension which we have to look into it. We don't have yet a very clear legal understanding on what happens to climate induced refugees or environmental refugees. We don't have it. We have the ongoing conflict and security concerns in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Central African Republic, and all that. Yemen again is a flashpoint. So you have, globally, when you look around, these are some of the flashpoints which comes in. Now we will come to the refugee protection needs and a context of South Asia. Again, we all know that South Asia again had witnessed a huge number of displacements and refugees right from the time of the India-Pakistan partition. We know almost 14 million people were made to get displaced, and they became refugees in the newly formed nation states. We know that as a context. Then we also know that how the Tibet region became quite tensed, and then the occupation of China, and the effect where we had the Tibetan refugees who had come into India. We all know the context of His Holiness Dalai Lama and the Tibetans who have come and sought asylum in India, and since 50s they have been here as refugees as a category, we know. Thirdly, we have a context of the Chakmas who had come in the late 60s from earlier East Pakistan, the present-day Bangladesh. They had come in Chakmas, and then we also have a context of the Bangladesh liberation around 1971. Nearly about 10 million people poured into India, as refugees. We have that also as a context. And of course, in the 80s, 83, post-83, the Sri Lankan refugees have come into India almost to the tune of 4 to 4.5 lakhs in different times and different waves. They have come in and sought asylum due to the ethnic conflict of Tamils and Sinhalese. Tamils ethnic question, and that had triggered a huge outpouring into India. So these are all we have as a context to name a few. Then of course in the last one decade we have Rohingyas. We have small numbers who have come in, and they are kind of not even recognized or counted for a very long, and excepting very recently that they have been counted for being returned, forcefully repatriated, which again had a lot of hue and cry, and matters went to the court also, that whether we should very forcefully return, whether we are violating the international principles, customary law pertaining to non-refoulement. That also became a moral and ethical question we have had and we had seen. So these are all actually as a context in South Asia we have, where other countries also, where within Nepal you have Nepal, Bhutan, having some of these refugees and displacements. Pakistan hosts a lot of Afghan refugees, for example, and Afghanistan hosts a bit of Iranian, Iraq refugees, Iran refugees. So you have all that in our neighborhood and extended neighborhood, which is also an important context. Now, looking specifically at the refugees, I don't want to go into definition, but we know the context that, it is very important to see that, how, refugees are defined by the 51 Convention, which becomes an important ground on which how do we distinguish a refugee from other categories of people. So at one level, we could very clearly distinguish when there are movement of people, displacement. Broad level, I would like to place that we need to distinguish between economic migration, which probably in the last 1 or 2 days we have been discussing also about the economic migrants. Even from India is actually having a lot of economic migrants into Europe, into West Asia, into other developed countries. For economic reasons, for greener pastures, somebody is moving. That's one category, and the world also has that kind of movement. But the forced migration is a scenario where it is involuntary, we said in the beginning, and that's something very important. Underneath that, you have refugees are somebody who have a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, who seeks asylum, or who moves to another country crossing the international border, owing to such fear and unwilling to avail the protection of himself or herself of their own country of origin. So essentially they cross the border and go. That's, I think, very important, where a refugee a category of people, we look at it. But if the similar persecution, similar problem, somebody is trapped within the nation state borders, we call them as IDPs, internally displaced persons. So here I think it's very important that IDPs are internally affected. The causation could be the same: human rights violations, persecutions, all that, which are there. But if they're not crossed the international border within the country, they would be called as IDPs, whatever the reasons even besides this. From in a refugee context, then with this background, that they have an objective fear, well-founded fear, and they are crossed the international border, then they become fall under the definition of refugees. It again depends on the host country, how they would like to recognize. For example, in India, we said, we are hosting Tibetans from the 50s, Chakmas in the late 60s, the Sri Lankan refugees in the the mid 80s. If we have them, so we have sort of hosted them, and to some extent they do have some kind of a formal protection, recognition. But whereas you look at somebody else like the Chin refugees from the Myanmar itself, or the Rohingyas, they are not even counted officially. So that becomes very problematic here when, from the legal perspective, when countries like India, when we are not signatories to the Refugee Convention or the related protocol, that becomes very, very tricky and ad hoc, we can call it, that we are treating different refugee categories in a different manner when there are international standards available. So the minimum standards at least ought to be taken, and we need to protect people in case of this definition, that if they are well-founded fear of being persecuted, then we have an obligation. This is a 51 Convention. Today, African Union has much better definition, including conflicts and other complex emergencies which are more relevant. Cartagena Declaration, or the African Union has much better approach to it. We know that. And even within South Asia, we did define it actually in the 80s, with our own SAARC, aegis of SAARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. The SAARC convention had also sort of brought in a kind of a model regional law led by Justice Bhagwati and others, as we all know. But somewhere or other, it did not gain much steam to push for a regional framework. So we don't have one at the regional level. We don't have any kind of legislation. So that legal vacuum itself is very problematic. So we treat different groups differently. That becomes quite challenging to see that how the treatment is meted out to these refugees. I think there has to be some thinking, as I told, awareness and advocacy front. There is, I think, a lot of gaps which are there. So you also have a scenario where, because of lack of clear understanding among the people, we almost, I mean, we always have a tendency among the people's perspective that why we should protect these refugees, why we need to take care of them. We have our own internal issues, our own problems, why we need to take care of them. That's a kind of a notion which prevails in general and among the political class, among the establishment. Cutting across the party lines, you always have a kind of insensitivity, even though we have had in the past hosted, even this dates back traditionally to even the medieval period recorded information we have, how we have hosted the Parsis, for example, the Iranian fire worshippers, the Parsis, Zoroastrians, otherwise they call. Even the medieval period, we have taken care of movement of people called the Jews have come in the 11th, 10th, 11th century. We have had different points of time, we have hosted, as per the records, we have taken care of people, who required the protection, who are otherwise called the refugee. But even in the 50s and 60s and 70s, we seem to have been a little more accommodative. But somewhere or other, again, in similar with the global resentment or global thing, we also see a situation where in the 90s and 2000, not so much very keen to host any refugees, and then we wanted to kind of push. That's the kind of a context we have that we don't have. So one can argue that we can have the convention signed and then follow the international norms as a democratic country. We could follow the international framework. That's one argument. The second could be that India may have a lot of challenges from the neighborhood and a lot of fragile neighborhood that we may get a tremendous pressure. So we may want to kind of have our own legislation and then take case to case and then see. But once you take somebody, then you will uniformly take care is another perspective which prevails. But the third is actually that do none, but see how the scenario is there, and then accordingly do it in a bilateral basis or country to country basis based on our relationship and context. We would like to take care of refugees. That's what we seem to be probably practicing. But the point here is that the victims, the refugees, the displaced ones, actually do not get an uniform and equal treatment. That becomes problematic. So when you look at Tibetans, they've got even land, and then they could build their settlements and housing. How much ever it is temporary, one sees, but they have seemingly got a little better settlement. But the next category is the Sri Lankans, where they did not get any right to land or anything like that, but they were kept in temporary camps for a very, very long time, almost now 25 to 30 years. And they do get certain good benefits, but yes, in terms of health, access to education and other things. But they don't have a right to buy property or be here. That becomes another category. But yet these two seem relatively, treated well or privileged within India when you compare them with Chin refugees or Afghan refugees or the Rohingya refugees. That becomes, kind of a challenging to see that why we are treating, even though the causation and background could be common, but why do we treat different refugees in a different manner? So that becomes, relating to the convention and definition, how we, treat refugees becomes very critical and challenging. So the visual of partition refugees, we all know that how it posed a tremendous challenge, unprecedented. Then what I had narrated, for a very long time, we have had different categories of refugees, in spite of the legal vacuum that we seem to be having quite a good track record, as the UN or UNHCR calls it. So we do have a interesting track record of taking care of refugees with our own limitations and other things. So the need now is about from advocacy to action, that how we take care of them and how we take care of them during these kind of a context, in terms of COVID and other challenging context, how they are taken care of, what is the kind of future they host. Is it that hosting them endlessly without anything, or you are talking about some kind of a time-bound solution, what we call again within the UN HCR language called the durable solutions. What kind of a durable solution we can attempt to provide solution and do them. As we know, the durable solutions constitute three broad approaches. One is the voluntary repatriation, that from the country of origin you negotiate and see whether the conditions become conducive. Then you facilitate the voluntary repatriation. Very important, that voluntariness is very important. Then you facilitate the return. The second is, of course, the assimilation or naturalization, citizenship, where you think that they could culturally adapt to you, they can be in your country and mingle and then settle down. Then you call that as assimilation or naturalization as the second option. The third one is neither the country of origin is conducive for a very long time, nor the host countries the refugees want to live, but probably they prefer to go to a third country. We call it the third country resettlement. These are broad options which are there. The combination permutations are, of course, very important, that how what is relevant to a particular category and how you provide the solution. The most important underlying thing I feel here is that wherever the country of origin they come in, the need for humanitarian diplomacy is something very important, that one has to ensure that you are part of the solution and you are part of facilitating that solution. That becomes, I think, important, where a proper understanding, proper efforts to be made to do that, all that are becoming very critical, rather than just trying to be very passively hosting somebody. So that again we will come. So if you look at it in a glance, we have these kind of numbers. We have the Myanmar Chin refugees around 20,000. The Rohingyas themselves are around 16,000 recorded. But the Government of India Statistics, Ministry of Home Affairs talks about 40,000. We do not know, but from the count of UNHCR and other civil society organizations, it's roughly about 16,000. We have Afghan refugees, some 14,000 plus, who again, came in different times. The former Soviet Union's intervention in Afghanistan, 79, 89, and post 89, the escalation of conflict, which made some of these, particularly Sikh refugees, Sikh Afghans, as we call them. They have been coming in at different times, and many of them linger around the borders, and particularly in Delhi, New Delhi, they live. We have Somali refugees, a small number, and others. These are all under some of them under the mandate of UNHCR. Some are outside the mandate as well. But assisted by directly with Government of India are only two categories: the Tibetans, 1 lakh plus, and Sri Lankans, again officially around 60,000. Some of them have been voluntarily repatriating in the recent times, around 60,000 plus in the camps, and another about 35,000 could live on their own outside the camp. Even that's very important. So roughly about 1 lakh Sri Lankan refugees we may have. Within the Sri Lankans, I would like to flag here, which is not much in the public discourse or even in the academia or research, we do not see much, is within the Sri Lankan refugees, you have a category of people called Indian origin Tamils. These were the people, very important to look at history, that these were the people who had migrated during the colonial period as plantation workers. So they volunteered. It's more of an economic reason that they had gone. So nothing to worry on the forced migration perspective. They had in the 18th, 19th century or even the early 20th century that they had gone on several numbers officially by the British to take them to the tea gardens, coffee estates, and rubber plantation work that they were taken for the labor shortage from particularly from southern India of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, the unified Andhra Pradesh. These are the pockets where these people were taken. And a brief trajectory about them, that they lived there, contributed tremendously to their economy, more in and around Kandy region of Sri Lanka. But apparently when Sri Lanka attained its independence in 1948, the first stroke they did is that they said that these Indian origin people are supposed to return. And then they brought in a new citizenship amendment in their constitution. And in 48 itself, they announced that nearly about 1 million people, nearly 10 lakhs, were told that you all have to return to your country, that is India. Now, there was a lot of humanitarian outcry saying that, for several decades and, 100 plus years that they have migrated voluntarily and lived and contributed to the economy. Now they have no connection to the roots. Where will they go? So this was something, very hugely, reverberating within Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan government, led by they were very insensitive to this Indian origin, and then they said that they can't help them to give citizenship. So they basically stripped them their citizenship and made them stateless. Straight away, you had a context of statelessness. Now they knocked at the door of India. At the time, the words of Mr. Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister, was that the country is overwhelmed with East and West crisis, refugee crisis, more towards the West Pakistan and the East Pakistan then, and they is overwhelmed. So it was a very frank words that we are already overwhelmed with millions of people who are affected, displaced. So we don't have time to come down to South and look at this issue. That was the kind of insensitivity shown to the the Indian origin people out there. And but ultimately it led into some dialogue and culminated into something called the Sastri Pact in 1964, the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord, or the Sastri Bandaranaike Pact, as it is called, where it agreed that India would take 2/3 of the population, and 1/3 could of the Indian origin, and 1/3 could be given citizenship within Sri Lanka. 2/3 will be brought to India and then given. So that's how a pact went on between 64 to 84, operationalized. And these some of them had come already to India, about to the tune of 4 to 4.5 lakhs have returned, repatriated into India, and they were sent to different parts of Tamil Nadu mainly, and even to Kerala, to Karnataka. They were scattered a little bit. That's how we have this population who have come in. Now you have somebody who had signed that part of the 2/3 that they need to come, which also has been critiqued, that how do you divide 2/3 and 1/3 and all that. Anyway, let's not go into that detail. Now the remaining 1/3, whether they were granted citizenship, no, they were also kept in limbo for quite some time, till almost 2002. And also the this pact of 64 to 80s, when things went smoothly. But in 83, when the ethnic conflict broke out, things also became very complex within Sri Lanka, and things also became complex to these people who were getting repatriated. So there was a stoppage suddenly, and then everybody were trapped within. And then later, when on their own, when refugees were pouring out, these Indian origin people also mingled and came. Now, by the time Government of India takes a policy that we have closed that 64 pact related repatriation of Indian origin, we are closing that, and henceforth whoever comes in will be only treated as refugees. That's how they have taken the Sri Lankan Tamils and the Indian origin Tamils were mingled, and then when they were taken into the camps post 83, they were all treated as refugees and kept in the camps. And some of these people kept voicing that they are not actually the Sri Lankan Tamils. Very important to categorize again, you see. They said they're not the Sri Lankan Tamils per se, meaning that they're not citizens of Sri Lanka, but rather they were plantation workers who were struggling on the new identity and citizenship issues, and they were supposed to even come, some of them supposed to come officially by the pact. They said that we were delayed by this conflict, and then now they have come here, they would like to now claim their citizenship. The Government of India said, nothing doing, all of you be in camp, we will come back to you later. So that's where they were left behind for almost now 2.5, 3 decades to struggle in the camps, which we need to sort of understand again within the Sri Lankan refugees when we are talking. These Indian origin Tamils are otherwise also called as the hill country Tamils. That's a kind of an identity they've got in Sri Lanka. Now, how do we understand the plight of the hill country Tamils and then do that? It's actually an endeavor where we have a kind of overlap of issues of whether they're refugees, whether they are stateless, and what happens to solution. So to look at it in an optimistic way, that the Sri Lankan issue could be taken care when we are doing repatriation or assimilation, whatever may be the choice. When we do that, you will still have the residue of these people who are uncertain. They neither have papers to go back to Sri Lanka, nor they have a thing to be in India. So that's the kind of a thing we need to do research, advocacy and action, which comes very important, as I said in the beginning. So these nuances have to be taken care. We cannot just broadly bracket them as refugees and see what we can do, in terms of charity, we will do. That's not the point. But we need to, I think, go into these labels, these things which become important. So there are, studies carried out by, let's say, Professor Surya Narayan and others in South, where they have gone to camps in Tiruchirappalli called Kottaputtu, for example, Kottaputtu camp in Tiruchirappalli, where there are a sizable number of these Indian origin people who actually, originally from Indian origin, but gone to suffer a displacement in, Sri Lanka's plantation workers. There again, there is a multiple displacement where they were told that they don't belong there, and they were pushed into India. And then, they could not come on time during the pact period. And then, now the conflict within Sri Lanka again compounds another challenge for them. Now they, come in the 80s, and then, still live without any kind of identity or citizenship. They live in camps in a helpless condition, where we endeavored, my, interest of working with, Sri Lankan refugees. Briefly, I had served with UNHCR, understand all these issues and nuances of what are the challenges faced by the refugees in the camp. And I could be part of the voluntary repatriation program since 2003 peace process briefly, and subsequent thing, I had moved out to UNDP and then to PISS, but yet I had gone back and conducted a study in 2014 on what kind of challenges they have, what kind of durable solutions they have. In that endeavor, again, we wanted to do one more detailed study on mapping the Indian origin Tamils. But again, due to insensitivity, due to lack of clarity, the government has not yet given the permission. They said that they will get back to later, and still last 3-4 years, our application is pending. This again, I'm telling you, as an academic institution, when we want to provide solution, research is very important, mapping is very important, and understanding the different categories, the nuances are very important. And there are challenges because of lack of permission and lack of any support. So that's something I think we need to work as academic institutions, civil society organizations, and probably even there are thinking going on that we need to kind of reach out to the political establishment and cutting across party lines. We have.
Excuse me, sir. Parivelan, sir.
Yes, please.
Shall we conclude within 1 or 2 minutes?
Yes, we can do that. Sure. Yeah, thanks for the reminder. I will do that in 2-3 minutes. So we have, endeavor to how do we reach out to the parliamentarians, for example. And as we know, these subjects are in the domain of the Union government, Ministry of External Affairs, Ministry of Home Affairs. How do we, ensure that these policymakers, lawmakers are clear about understanding these issues? We have also Mr. Sashi Tharoor, who had attempted to bring in private bill in the parliament. It did not see the light. There were other efforts made by few individuals. We don't have any endeavor to go towards any formal legislation. That's something lacuna which prevails, which I think we may have to look at it. Coming back now to just to conclude with this overall thing, that how do we address these much of issues which are there. We also know earlier, like Chakmas, for example. Now, Chakmas have come into India, displaced from former East Pakistan, present Bangladesh. But yet, they again, did not get a solution. It is something like where through a judicial intervention, where there was a case of National Human Rights Commission versus the state of, the Arunachal Pradesh, where the Chakmas case, where the judiciary had to tell that they have a right to life and a right to dignity. There are occasions that the judiciary has come to invoke certain positive judgments, which becomes interesting to see that the refugees are given the dignity and protection when there are no clear policy or any kind of a legal framework. I think we need to endeavor now to go towards more of understanding these issues. They are not mere numbers, they are not mere statistics, but they are people, human beings with feelings. And in a general context, they have tremendous challenge. In this kind of COVID context, they are getting further and further marginalized. Looking at the case of Rohingya, it's a immeasurable suffering that they undergo, how they are so practically be persecuted so badly, and in transit they undergo so much of suffering. And in that vulnerability, when they come here, when you don't count them, you don't officially recognize them, you don't even give them any kind of food or water or shelter or any basic need. And it is in that scenario, we are also using the language that we will all forcefully repatriate you, return you. So that's, I think, something we need to become more sensitive, more empathize. And this is where we need to bring in a connect on our legal paradigm. What are the legal possibilities? What are the practical protection possibilities? How do we bring on board UNHCR, academia, civil society organizations and other voluntary organizations, NGOs who work in this area, and bring a kind of a connect and then have a much better organized one. I'm sure that each segmented way, in a fragmented way, we all are working, but I think we need to get more organized in this challenging environment. It reminds us one important point that COVID tells us, that we need to become more humble, more humane, and not forget about the marginalized and vulnerable groups. It is time that when our own internal migrants, the reverse migration, had showcased to us that how our own citizens suffered tremendously. In the words of Professor Ranavir Samadar, who we worked together, the Maharanirban Calcutta Research Group, had used to write word that we see the refugees' plight in the internal migrants, and internal migrants' eyes we could see the refugee plight. I think that is something we need to now come to understand, that these issues make us that we need to have a better policies and legal framework to understand. We need to move from ad hoc approach, charity approach, to more of a legal rights-based approach, where we could essentially take care of their needs, their concerns, and become part of the solution in the long run, rather than making them linger here and make them suffer in an invisible manner. I think I'll stop here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Parivelan sir. The talk was immensely rich in content, and it was highly informative, and thank you for your commentable presentation here. As we see, Parivelan sir has rightly commented on forced migration, refugees in the midst of COVID-19. His speech was centered on starting from the definition of refugee, asylum seekers, migrants, forced migrants, and IDPs. He was particularly looking at the pattern of refugeeization, refugee-producing countries, as well as the categories of refugees, just like different kinds of refugees, Rohingya, South Asian refugees, Middle East refugees, European refugees. And his speech was also centered on some of the policy making as well as the polities. And he has also commented on a diachronic study as well as a statistical analysis of refugees, as well as the refugeeization and refugeehood. And moreover, he was particularly pointing at the legal vacuum in the case of refugees as well as forced migrants when it comes to transnational borders. And moreover, he was particularly referring at the flow of refugee as well as the statistical analysis. And he was aiming, by his speech, he was aiming the need for more researchers in this field and more research opportunities in this area. And he has also focused on the need for a solution, a durable solution. Though it was advocated by UNHCR and UNDP and all, still there is some lacking, and he was pointing out that. And moreover, as he has already mentioned in his speech, the speech was also focusing from advocacy to the action. And as he has concluded, we need to have more legal action, as well as a kind of legal vacuum has to be filled. And there must be immense research potential in this area. So there is immense research potential in this area, so that the webinar is successfully rightly commenting in terms of Parivelan's speech. It is particularly looking at the need for more actions as well as durable solutions and a humanitarian ground of understanding in this case. Now the floor is open for our Q&A session. We can take 3-4 questions. So we'll take 3-4 questions here. Shall we go to the...
Yeah, I do see some questions already in the chat box, I think. Should we,
Yes,
somebody we are going to refer it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, Miss Krishna is here. She'll be
I will
referring
refer
to
the
that.
questions to you.
Okay, over to Miss Krishna.
Thank you, sir, for that very informative presentation. Now we have the first question from Richard Obedi, and he asks, why can't the convention concentrate more efforts in addressing the refugee producing factors? Because the UN and government have been doing the same things, but unfortunately, these actions have shown that they are not sustainable and addressing the challenges.
Okay, I'll go one by one. Yeah, okay. Yes, I think it's a very interesting observation that, the convention seems to be focusing on more on the response side, that how do we protect, how do we take care of refugees. It is true that the convention is not, 1951 convention is not talking about preventive strategies. I think that's what the questioner is bringing in this important point. It agreed, at one level, one looks at that, these issues of human rights violations or persecution and other things are something, which is within happening within a nation state, where the international community has an obligation, but sometimes you don't have the means and methods to go and do that. So they were looking at from the point of view that more from the consequences, that if these people are pushed as refugees and become helpless, that the international community has an obligation to go and take care. That's how the 51 convention is framed. As we said, that it was more framed in the context of the Second World War particularly. But later it was seen essential that there are new conflicts which were emerging, unfolding in the 60s and 70s. Then the convention was expanded with the 67 protocol, and then said that it's relevant. So let's keep in mind that that the convention is a very, very ad hoc instrument. But later it was made as an international law, a legal framework to look into it. Therefore, yes, it is only looking at the a response part of it, that how do we take care. It does not go into preventive strategies. Whereas if you look at the other dimensions within the United Nations and international community, we have gone ahead and we have formed something called UN OCHA, United Nations Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, for example. That is the body precisely fills in this vacuum, that how do you do the early warnings, how do you understand conflict, and then how do you make an intervention. Or the second example is R2P, the response to protect principles have come in. R2P, the responsibility to protect principle. But again, this came in 2005 World Summit, but these are all not effectively working. Looking at what happened in Rwanda or Yugoslavia, these kind of frameworks we have created, but yet they aren't very effective, as we have seen in number of issues. But yet I think United Nations itself has its limitation. But it is, I think, the world community, the nation states have to come forward, and we need to endeavor to do the prevention. I agree to the point that prevention is better than cure. But as of now, we are only looking at refugees from the point of view of response. How do we respond? How do we take care? What are the gaps we are looking at? But I think I agree that in the point on prevention, early warnings when some conflict is about to unfold, how do you intervene? But here again, an issue of sovereignty versus collective responsibility. There is always a challenge. When something happens in Myanmar, for quite some time there was a reluctance. Can we go in and intervene and prevent this displacement of Rohingyas? No, the Myanmar did not allow anybody to go in. So that's where the sovereignty principle becomes again a barrier. That which place you see that there is a conflict happening, helplessness happening, how do you intervene? How do you prevent it? I think we are still working towards that, but it's important point to take that we need to, I think, evolve more on prevention. Why did Syrian conflict unfold so much? And we all know how some of these countries themselves are responsible, developed countries themselves are responsible in escalating the conflict, whether it is United States, whether it is Russia, whether it is Saudi Arabia, whether it is Iran, all are responsible for escalating the conflict. We know that how they used it as a theater of geopolitics and made huge suffering to the people. I think we need to kind of now work towards prevention rather than response. I agree. And I think therefore the 51 convention requires a lot of overhauling and changes. And there is also other context of climate and other things which we need to kind of pack in this thing where there are new challenges will unfold. Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have another question from James Asuma, a project manager from YSYF Ghana. So his question is, how can migration in the developing countries reduce? And is migration by choice or force?
See, as we told earlier, that migration, which is voluntary for economic reasons, is another category. What kind of laws you have, all that stuff is one thing which we can separately deal with. In South Asia, for example, we don't have any kind of even economic mobility law and all that, which I think is needed today when there are a lot of stress factors emerging. For example, a lot of Nepalis in any way have an access already. But from Bangladesh, or from Sri Lanka, if somebody wants to come for only economic reasons, we don't have any access. Probably, I think we need to, evolve that also. That's one part of it. Second part of the question is about, most of these people whom we call as refugees are the ones who are forcefully only migrated. It's very involuntary that they're pushed because of tremendous persecution and other reason. I think that is something which we need to address. If somebody is badly persecuted and then they come to your country, how can we close the door? At least, we need to have a kind of a policy to give them some relief, some kind of a thing, if not a permanent rehabilitation or resettlement solutions. At least the relief and other things that I think are needed. That is something a part of an international human rights obligation we have, which emanates from Universal Declaration of Human Rights and several other conventions talk about protecting people. And I think that is something which we need to look into, that if somebody is in need of care and protection, we need to do that in a very secure environment. So I think that part becomes important when we say somebody is forcefully been affected. The Sri Lankan Tamils, for example, were forcefully pushed out because of the protracted serious ethnic conflict, the civil war which happened. Similarly, the persecution in Myanmar is pushing people. So these are all contexts where it is never voluntary, but it is involuntary. See, the basic point is that no refugee in the first place wants to leave their very home or their country and come to another country. Then they are not refugees, in fact. They could be economic or other reasons. Therefore, if somebody is coming out of a conflict or a human rights violation or persecution, mind you that we need to take care that why they are leaving the first place and coming. Having interacted with refugees on many occasions, one sees that they never wanted to come in the first place. They were forcefully displaced. So I think that is very important, that it is involuntarily and forceful displacement. Yes, please.
Okay, sir. Now, next we'll have our final questions due to the time constraints. So the question is asked by Kanak Kanti Bagchi from North Bengal University, Siliguri. Question is, what is the attitude of Government of India towards the Rohingya refugees and how to solve the Rohingya refugee crisis?
Yeah, I think this Rohingya refugee crisis is something we need to take it very seriously. It's very important. One, that what is happening within Myanmar region, I think it was the Rakhine region of Myanmar was not known or clear till few years back, and then but we all knew what was happening. There was a tremendous discrimination, tremendous persecution, and all that was a context why from 2011-12 onwards they have been outpouring, going into neighboring Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and all that initially. Then they started concentrating, coming more towards Bangladesh, and now a few, hardly few thousand, around 15,000-16,000 are in India. Now, what should India do? There are two things. One, I think we have had refugees in the past, and the Rohingyas. As a secular country, we need to, I think, not discriminate them. We need to definitely take care of them. Count them first. Count them that they are here and officially recognize them. Number one. Number two, we need to ensure that we don't forcefully push them, because this is a global norm that you don't forcefully push somebody out of your country. That will be violating the principles of non-refoulement, where their life will be at risk. If this principle is something part of our thing, that we need to ensure that we will keep them here and provide them the basic needs, which most of them are lacking. Give that, so that your element of security thing also gets addressed. Because today India tries to place that they are so vulnerable that somebody could misuse them and then pose a security threat. But if you take care of them the way you have taken care of Tibetans or Sri Lankans, the matter ends there, that they are under your protection, your care, and your monitoring. Even it is not good from that sense, but I'm even saying that you can monitor them, keep them under your protection, and facilitate. Now fourthly, that you need to play the role of humanitarian diplomacy. Compared to any other country in the region of South and Southeast Asia, India has a very good relations with Myanmar. Myanmar is taking this issue very sensitively, but now they are slowly opening up, where India needs to dialogue with the Myanmar government and ensure that they are all voluntarily repatriated and settled in a peaceful environment. I think in that endeavor, India, United Nations, and others could go and do that. So in the entire thing, what we need is, dignity and protection is something very important. And already there is a kind of image emerging that we are, trying to be very selective, and we are trying to discriminate. I think that's not, good from the sense of humanitarian point of view, as well as from human rights point of view, that we need to ensure that we remove this negative tag and take care of them from just a humanitarian perspective, and protect them. That's something I think we need to endeavor towards the solution for Rohingyas.
Thank you, Dr. Parivelan, sir. It's been indeed a pleasure to be here with you in this platform, and thank you for your very holistic kind of approach towards refugees, forced migration, and COVID-19. Let me wholeheartedly express my gratitude to you, and for the official vote of thanks, let me invite Krishna from MGU University.
I take this opportunity to express my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Parivelan for spending your valuable time and giving us such an informative address. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I would also like to thank Dr. Shahina Mol AK for handling the session with such adaptability. And I would also like to thank and appreciate all my attendees for posing your questions and making the session very interactive and informative. Thank you so much. And the next session, we'll start with a break of a minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all for hosting, and thank you for the good questions as well.
Thank you, sir. See you again.
Yes.
Good morning, all. Welcome once again to our technical session. So we are going to have our session number 5. So now we begin with session 5, post-migration and refugee. And we have Dr. Shahina Mol AK with us to chair the session. All the questions can be posted in the chat section, which will be discussed after the presentations. So now I hand over the session to Dr. Shahina Mol AK.
Well, thank you, Ms. Krishna. So straight away, we'll go to presentations. And to the paper presenters, let me tell you that you will be the co-host. If you have slides, you can present your slides also. And we will have the presentation for 7 to 8 minutes. And all the presenters must be there until the end of the session. We'll take a Q&A session until after all the sessions. Okay. So without much ado, let me invite Ms. Winnie for her presentation. Winnie is our first paper presenter. So Winnie, welcome you.
Thank you, ma'am. I hope I am audible. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Thank you. My paper is on international organizations and COVID-19, the need for strengthening global governance. So for the past 2 days, we have been deliberating on the pandemic-induced impacts on migrant communities. So my paper would also be dealing with the role of how international organizations have managed this crisis. So we all know that as the novel virus spreads with a surge in the number of cases and deaths, no country remains immune from this evolving threat. When the world faced the Spanish flu in 1918, there wasn't a wide array of multilateral networks. In 2019-20, in spite of a wide range of institutions in place, we saw most states taking a unilateral approaches. International organizations were created to promote international cooperation and coordination among nations and to offer a coherent response to global crisis. In this paper, I attempt to analyze the flawed structuring of the international organizations over managing such truly global crises, specifically in the context of accountability and governance. I will also be highlighting why international cooperation is a need of the hour. First, we will have to understand that international organizations can be regarded as manifestations of the organizing process on the international level. The total network is huge, and now the organizations are trying to cater their responses to non-traditional security threats, which are stateless and transnational. So let us take the case of United Nations Security Council, WHO, and a few more if time permits. So we saw that the response from the side of the United Nations was much delayed. And in March, there was an attempt to come up with a resolution against the crisis. And we saw that China did block it, considering that the resolution on pandemic as public health matters were outside the purview of UNSC. Now, but it was a very same body that in fact passed a resolution in 2014 designating Ebola as a threat to international peace and security. All right, but later on we could see that by July, the UNSC did come up with a resolution on global ceasefire to unite the efforts to fight COVID, as well as it came up with the UN Global Humanitarian Response Plan. And a few weeks back, when the UNSC did convene, we could see that the UN chief was also highlighting that nations need to be duty bound. They need to discard their ideological and other bases of animosity and should come together. And he did cite this lack of global cooperation. Having said that, we could see that the humanitarian response plan to deal with the pandemic-induced impacts in fragile and war-torn states, very specifically internal displaced people and refugees, is a laudable attempt. But we can see that this will act as a fundraising vehicle to respond to the humanitarian impacts. Let us see how it progresses and materializes. Now, let us just look at the response very shortly with how the G7 and the G20 try to manage this issue. They did meet very late in March, but when they met initially, the G7 members was focused on their border closures, and in G20, the members rejected the IMF request to double the resources, as well as they rejected to suspend the debt obligations of the poor nations. So we could see that in many cases, the nations were not willing to take up opportunities for global consultation, and some nations were also trying to use it to advance their anti migrant policies. Now, very specifically, coming to the World Health Organization, it was created as a UN specialized agency in 1948, and post 2000, the significance of WHO was emerging. And we saw a lot of infectious diseases like SARS, H1N1, Ebola, and Zika viruses coming. In fact, during the time of these disease outbreak, the way WHO dealt with this entire issue was also questionable. It did highlight a lot of shortcomings within the WHO. Of course, we cannot help but forget the delay that the WHO had in declaring COVID as a global emergency. Now, as I said, understanding the shortcomings, the governing body in WHO did strengthen the international health regulations. Okay, now this included to govern the state's conduct vis-a-vis an infectious disease, to give powers to the UN WHO Director General to declare a pandemic health emergency of global concern, and it also mandates states to increase their pandemic response capacities. And when we say these, there are a lot of structural flaws that is there within the WHO. The WHO is considered to be a repository of scientific expertise, the focal point of global health surveillance, yet it cannot compel the states to comply with these international health regulations, as it lacks an enforceable mechanism for the same. Added to that, the lack of personnel and logistical capacity was highlighted during the time of the Ebola outbreak as well. Budget cuts and the way how the states and other donors prefer short-term focus against select diseases rather than building the public health capacities and surveillance mechanism to detect outbreaks is a major concern, which are asked to self-report its progress. We can see that accountability factor is also less. A lot of clauses within the international health regulations are of concerns. Countries can impose emergency measures that are not mandated by WHO if they feel that such national measures yield better results. And this was in fact used to justify the border closures and the restrictions. The WHO's lack of enforceable mechanism to ensure that vaccine distribution is equitably done is another major concern. Here, nations can in fact misuse the Nagoya protocols on access and benefit sharing, which grants the nation's sovereignty over its biological resources. And what we can come to see is that as of now, there is a lot of responses, positive responses. Though delayed, a lot of positive responses are coming from the side of WHO as a source of expertise for advancing the global scientific cooperation. But what we need to see is that international organizations and its relevance can be understood in terms of how the states make use of it. In fact, to be beneficiaries, the states also need to come up with inclusive, non-discriminatory policies within the organizations. They need to be responsible. They need to take up pragmatic actions. Only then can the credibility of international organizations can be increased. In the wake of COVID-19, we
2 more minutes. Only 2 more minutes.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Now, in the wake of COVID-19, we saw a lot of instances wherein the multilateral networks were in fact criticized. Now, what we can do, or let us try to see the positive, or what we can try to learn from this scenario is that if there is a renegotiation in the terms of the international health regulations, if more power is given to the World Health Organization, if the obligations of the states are increased, we can actually take a lead in preventing the collapse of the multilateral framework. In fact, G20 and other such organizations can take a major role here. And we see that we also require multi-level leadership, which includes coalitions of civil society, private sector, and think tanks to come to the forefront. And it is also, we shouldn't use global public health as a backdrop for political gain right now. We have seen how some nations are using it, but right now, that should not be the focus. International organizations can help to mobilize only a fraction of resources, but concerted actions from the nation states will only help in it being a fruitful enterprise. I stop here. Thank you.
I
Okay,
guess
thank you. Okay, thank you, Ms. Winnie Davis. She is the research scholar from School of International Relations and Politics, Mahatma Gandhi University, presenting on the topic international organization and COVID-19 need for strengthening global governance. So thank you, Winnie. Next, we are moving to the next presentation. The next presentation is by Ms. Nancy Puri, who is the research scholar, MIT Institute of International Studies, MIT University, and C.R. Recovery, who is the officiating director, MIT University Foundation, Noida, Uttar Pradesh. So let me invite Nancy Puri and her co-presenter, C.R. Recovery, for their presentation on the topic challenges faced by Rohingyas in Bangladesh during COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, so welcome. Okay. Hello, Miss Nancy. Hello. Hello, Miss Nancy.
Okay. Yeah, ma'am, Nancy is having some technical issues. So can we call Adira Sajeev for the presentation?
Okay. So let Nancy and Kauri get ready for their presentation.
Okay.
Okay. So. Okay, so friends, there is some technical error for Nancy, and we'll move to the next presentation straight away. So next we have Atira Sajeev, who is a postgraduate student, politics and human rights, Mahatma Gandhi University, Kerala. And Atira is presenting her topic, her paper on considering pandemic affected migrants as internally displaced persons, India's policy deficit, challenges, and emerging needs. So welcome you, Atira.
Am I audible, Miss?
as you are.
Good afternoon to all. First of all, I would like to convey my sincere thanks to the coordinators of this international webinar, especially to Dr. Lirar sir for giving me such an opportunity. My topic is considering pandemic affected internal migrants as internally displaced persons, India's policy deficit challenges and emerging needs. As we all know that migration or human mobility is not a new phenomenon, which is a worldwide accepted phenomenon. The COVID-19 outbreak from the epicenter of Wuhan in China to the whole world is impacted to rapid human mobility. Migrants are most vulnerable to disasters and epidemics. In the Indian scenario, internal migration is a livelihood and coping strategy for millions of Indians. According to the Article 19 and its clauses of the Indian Constitution, which guarantees the citizens' a right to move freely within the territory of India. In reality, a large proportion of internal migrants traveling to new areas of work in response to India's uneven economic development, and they form a very crucial part of our economy. As per the 2016-17 economic survey, there is an estimated 100 million internal migrants, consisted 20% of total workforce and 10% of contribution to the economic output of our nation. The above things is about a brief about the focusing community, that is the internal migrant population in our country. During the weeks of pandemic-led lockdown, we have come across accounts of how internal migrants in our country were stranded on the roads while we were in safe mode in our homes. All these miseries faced by them are unimaginable for most of us who blessed with a secured and dignified life and physical conditions. The unavailability or the dilemmas of security and alternative solutions made them vulnerable and internally displaced for a span of time. The World Bank's report, namely COVID-19 crisis through a migration lens, explained the magnitude of the issue. Nearly 40 million internal migrant people of India and their livelihoods were impacted by the pandemic. Around 50,000 to 60,000 people moved across the country. The extended lockdown period made make their conditions more vulnerable. India's fundamental policy vacuum, or we doesn't have a domestic policy for their proper management, is the major reason behind the vulnerable situations. And they face a lot of challenges in our society, like a lack of social security and health benefits, poor implementation of safety standards, lack of portability services like food, low wages, and lack of employment guarantee programs, and so on. The main problem is that they represent largely the informal economy of our nation. However, there are some mechanisms for their protection. Most importantly, the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act of 1979, which crafted to ensure their protection. But due to the poor implementation, there is a gap in theory and practice, which evidently visible during the lockdown period. The outbreak of the pandemic and the implemented standstill revealed the internal inequalities in our society and legal system at a very visible form. That led to the Supreme Court intervention in this matter. During that time, the union and state governments take some immediate actions through some schemes like Migrant Workers Return Registration, Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, Kharif Kalyan Package with World Bank assistance. State governments launched portals for their data accumulation. The Indian Railway implemented train services. But in real sense, all schemes faced lots of difficulties and delays. These above mentioned difficulties and issues regarding the plight of internal migrant community make them internally displaced persons during the most devastating time we ever faced before. The inadequate management of their crisis proved that they are internally displaced in our democratic setup. The Supreme Court of our country, by the sumoto writ petition, recognized them as internally displaced persons. So let us examine who is an IDP. The 1998 United Nations Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement, also known as the DENG Principles, is the comprehensive framework related to IDPs, which defines who is an IDP as a person or group of persons forced or obliged to flee or to leave their homes or place of habitual residence, in particular or as a result in order to avoid the effects of armed conflict, generalized violence, human rights violations, or natural or human-made disasters, and who not crossed internationally recognized state border. This definition clearly says that disaster and human rights violations are some of the reasons for IDP creation. Here, in the Indian context, first of all, the pandemic considered as a disaster, and the migrant workers and their family worked on food for long distance, like the homeless within the home, that is IDPs, is an evidence for the human rights violations they faced, since they have homes, but their plight during the most dangerous time in an insecure manner made them internally displaced. In India, internal displacement is also a general phenomenon. We face from independence to till now a lot of examples. The major reasons for internal displacement in India is conflict or violence, development programs of governments, disasters or natural calamities. But as in same as in the case of internal migrants, there is not a domestic policy mechanism for internally displaced persons too. Especially, we are not ratified the guiding principles on internal displacement due to the sovereignty sentiments of our nation. Here exists a National Disaster Management Authority introduced 2019 National Disaster Management Plan, offers policy directions for rehabilitation of vulnerable people, but in case of response to the impact of pandemic, that was also failed. So the need of the hour is the new policy innovations with regard to internal migration and internal displacement. So my major suggestions of my paper are firstly, there is a choice to acknowledge GPID as a gap filler in our country. Secondly, the implementation of welfare-oriented labor reforms and projects at national level can prevent work-related vulnerabilities. The adoption of human right-based, gender-sensitive and age-sensitive policies can help. Creation of portability of social protection entitlements are necessary in our system. It is necessary to avoid the stigmatization of the vulnerable people to all risks. Providing shelter security from affordable rental housing to affordable private housing is also an innovation. There is a need of action-oriented rehabilitation and resettlement policy at the national level is necessary. Through which the introduction of an advanced policy agenda with the coverage of all aspects related to both communities through an integrated machinery can ensure coordination and coverage across the whole nation. So the existing ignorance is no longer an option. So the filling of the policy vacuum with productive and working policy elements is the only solution of overcome this kind of issues in near future. Thank you.
All right, all right. Hello. Okay. Am I audible? I hope I am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You're audible.
All right. Okay. So we'll move to, thank you, Atira. Next, we'll move to our next presentation. Just 1 minute. Okay. Well, so that was Atira Sajiv. Thank you, Atira. Next, we'll move to the next presenter. Next presenter is Mr. Faisal Muhammad and Mr. Saleh Annan. That's a co-presenter. Research scholar, English language and literature, University of Kerala, Thiruvananthapuram. And the topic of presentation is internally displaced people of Yemen at the time of COVID-19, challenges and difficulties. So welcome you for your presentation.
Thank you so much, ma'am, and good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Oh, okay, thank you. Let me share my screen. Please. Are my slides visible?
Yes,
Excuse
yes.
me.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Okay, thank you. In the beginning, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present my presentation in this international webinar. Then I would like to thank Dr. Shahina for chairing this session. Dear participants, let me move to my title, that is internally displaced people of Yemen at the time of COVID-19 challenges and difficulties. Before going to the title itself, let me give you a brief introduction about my home, Yemen. It maybe will be useful or an extra information for you. Yemen, it is a country in Asia continent, and its capital is Sana'a. The population of Yemen is around 30 million, and the area it is 527,970 kilometers squared. And the official language that it is used there in that country, it is Arabic. Then we move to the internally displaced people in general. According to the United Nations, they define the internally displaced people as persons or group of persons who have been forced or obliged to flee or to leave their homes or places of habitual residence, in particular as a result of or in order to avoid the effects of armed conflict, situations of generalized violence, violations of human rights, or natural or human-made disasters, and who have not crossed on internationally recognized states border. Actually, from this definition, we recognize the reasons that make people displace their places, that it is one of the reasons is armed conflict, situations also of generalized violence, violations of human rights, and human or natural disasters. Then the main causes of displacement in Yemen, that's one armed conflict that started in 2015 between the legitimate government forces and the Houthi forces. And also another causes of displacement is the COVID-19. Actually, the displaced people of Yemen, they are suffering from the reaching of COVID-19. And when the COVID-19 reach, then another issue raised there. According to the recording there, more than 3 million displaced their people due to the reason that I mentioned. Then I would like to give a brief introduction about the outbreak of COVID-19 in Yemen. So the first case of COVID-19 in Yemen was identified in April 2020. Then the total affected cases are 2,053, and the death cases are 596. Actually, there is no accurate information about the true number of affected cases to the shortage of tests. The real number is higher than those reported. In that time, before the reaching of the COVID-19, the displaced people have sent urgent appeals to the Ministry of Health, to the national and international organizations, and also to the concerned authorities to help them. But unfortunately, their forces are not here. So people were forced to leave their homes across the country. They starting to search for an area that it is less affected with the area that are living there. And when they move to that area, or when they search a safe area to protect themselves from the COVID-19, most of them, they depend on the aid and the relief that comes from the donors. I mean by the donor, that is from the international organizations, such as UNICEF or food program and WHO organizations. Then we come to the challenge and difficulties of internally displaced persons of Yemen. So I can give regarding for the health sector. Actually, few hospitals are working there due to, as I mentioned, for the armed conflict that started in 2015. So most of the hospitals closed their doors before the patients because they were targeted by the two parties of the conflict. Then they started to close their doors. Then a few doctors also were working in spite of the hospital. The few hospital working there, also few doctors there. In the beginning, there are many volunteers like doctor, nurses started working in the hospital. But when they heard about the approaching of the COVID-19, unfortunately, they disappeared. Then in that hospital, also even the hospital is there and the few doctors is there, there is another difficulty that it is faced. It is lack of beds in the hospital. And most of the displaced people who were affected with the COVID-19, they were driving to the hospital, but unfortunately they didn't find a vacant bed there. They put them on the ground, and also they don't take care or they don't pay any attention for them. Then lack of medicine also, there is another challenge and difficulties that face the displaced people in Yemen. Another also tools test. So the hospitals are not provided with the adequate or the sufficient tool test in order to test the affected cases. Then other challenges and difficulty also, even overcrowded camps. Then when the government and the international organizations started to make camps for the displaced people, they bought a small, a crowded camps together, and lack of food also. The displaced people were suffering from getting sufficient food. So because they are, as I mentioned before, they were depending on the aid coming from the international organizations, and also that international organizations stopped providing them, in the sufficient food due to the fighting or the ongoing fighting. They stopped them for going to the camps itself. Then another challenge and difficulty is that it is the absence of clear water and sanitation. Even the government or the government of Yemen or national or international organizations, they provide water for the displaced people, but that water is not enough. That's not sufficient. And sometimes, a lot of people or a lot of displaced people provided by one small tank, then it will not be sufficient for them. Another also challenge, there comes, they were in the a far area, but unfortunately they were targeted by the two parties of the conflict. So this side will fight with the other side, but unfortunately the victims of the conflict from the displaced people, and that's a great issue for them. So I can come to the conclusion: displaced people of Yemen living in terrible conditions at the time of COVID-19. Every internally displaced person in Yemen has a story of human suffering, violence, and fear. The situation are going from bad to worse in the camps of displaced people in light of the absence of ignorance and of national and international organizations, because most of the international organizations there, they left or they stopped their funding for the displaced people camps, because they would like to protect themselves from the fighting, so they don't go to there and providing with the sufficient food and sufficient materials for them. The government attributed the shortcomings to the deficit in the financial budget, as well as the departure of most of the international organizations. Let me share with you some photos. This is a photo for the camps that made by the government for the displaced people in Yemen. And as you see, they are crowded over there. And at the time of COVID, and also, by the way, the camps are not provided with the basic needs of life. So and also there is a small, as you see there, a small tent is there, and a lot of people, in more than maybe 6 or 7 members inside that. And it is very difficult for them to follow the social distance rules. And even they are not providing with the toilets and many basic needs of life. Even the water there, the tank, they provide, for more than 10 tents, they provide a small tank water, but unfortunately they will last for 1 hour or 2 hours, and it is a big problem for them. Then here, at the time of the flood, even the camps will be not protected well. Then they,
Faisal, can you conclude?
Yeah, I can conclude
Okay.
within 30 seconds, ma'am. Okay. Then here, the photo regarding for the aids that coming from the international, and also a big queue is there, and sometimes some people affected with that standing in the queue. So, and also there is a hospital here that it is already damaged by the fighting or the conflict and there. Then they close their doors. And I can come to my slide. This my talking is over. And thank you for your listening. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Well, thank you, Faisal, for your talk on refugees during Yemen refugees. Now, next we have Adarsh Vinath. He is a research scholar from Political Science Department of Madras Christian College. And Mr. Adarsh is presenting his paper on Syrian refugees and COVID-19. Okay, so welcome, Adarsh.
Thank you, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Adarsh. I am an Indian research scholar from Madras Christian College, Chennai.
Okay, Adarsh, there is some a slight problem with your audio. Can you just adjust the space between your mouth and mic?
Okay. Right now, is it okay?
There is an echo, I think. Have you logged in from two devices? Are there any two devices together?
No. Hello, can you hear?
Yes, this is more clear.
Okay, man. More on the topic. My topic is that the Syrian refugees and the COVID-19 and the challenges and concern. So we know that the Syrian refugee crisis that started from 2011 itself create a huge problem within the country and the outside the world. Like after the World War II, this is one of the exodus refugee flew from a country to other country. The refugees from Syria flew to our seeking asylum to nearby countries like Syria, Libya, then Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and 10% of the Syrian refugees goes to Europe. So right now, these refugees are settled in some temporarily set up like camps erected in the countrysides of the hosting countries. And the COVID at first, the situation of the refugees is very pathetic in the camp itself. And in addition to that, the COVID-19 create a huge impact or a hit over the refugees. And we know that when the COVID-19 issue comes, the WHO issued a safety protocol in the whole world, but we know that the refugees are settled in a closed place and closed in the camps. It is not possible to follow the COVID-19 safeguards, and we know that the refugee cannot afford the basic living factors. They can't even follow the safety protocols and the hygiene protocols. So it creates a chance for them for spreading the diseases and the COVID-19 diseases itself. Then the other challenge they face, that is most of the nation can't afford to sponsor the basic needs of the refugees. So the problem is that the nations even can't feed the citizen themselves, so they can't provide facilities to the refugees. So that's a problem. Then the second problem is that most of the refugees refugees working as some daily wages or like street vendoring or salesperson in the hosting countries. And when the COVID-19 comes out, most of the nation issued a lockdown. So about 90% of the refugees lost their jobs. So they can't even afford their basic amenities or their daily essentials. So that's a problem. The next one is that even most of the nation failed to resist the COVID-19 issue. So they can't sponsor to the refugees. So the world nations, a world organization can't even send the refugees the essential things like food, water, medicines, clothing, shelters, etc. That was one of the problem that the refugees right now face. Then the second thing is that we know that refugees are person who abandon all their savings and things from their own country because of the issues in their own country. So they are in a mental pressure. They face lot of tension because they lost all their savings. So these COVID-19 create another mental pressure over them. And when some study says that the COVID-19 issue created a huge impact on the mental health of the refugees in the refugee camp itself. This is then the COVID-19 issue mostly affected basically three people, like the woman, the child, and the old age people. The woman who are who doesn't have any financial thing or financial support, they need to work outside the camp. So the COVID-19 create a huge impact on them, and they are forced to do sexual things and other forced work. And the child, can't even afford education, like the online classes are not even afford the children in the refugee camps. Then the third person is old age people. Due to COVID-19, they can't even get proper food, so the malnutrition and lack of medicine create issues in these three people. Then another important thing is that the transportation, because we know that refugees are people who erected camps in the countryside, and it is far from the city or the people who live together. So due to COVID-19, the basic transportation systems are not easily available. So the transportation of goods and other goods like medicine, food, and other things are not easily access to the refugee camps. That's one of the problem. The second thing is that we know that if we focus on the refugees in the nearby countries, like we know that the COVID creates so many problems in their day-to-day life. So most of the parents decided to marry their girl children to someone who is able to protect the girls. So in some countries like Lebanon and in Egypt, child labor is there as part of the COVID-19 in refugee camps. So the parents decided to marry their children to someone who protect them. The second thing is that we know that if we concern about the refugee issues in Syria itself, we know that the main transportation system to Syria from other countries is the port system, like through sending things to Syria through ports like Beirut. And we know that there is a huge exploitation in Beirut on August 4 itself. So this create a great problem in transportation to from Beirut to Syria, like the basic essential like food, other medical things. So right now Syria is a failed nation. They can't even afford things from other country. So the exploitation happened in Beirut create huge impact, like price of food material increases, lack of medicine, lack of fresh water, lack of other essentials. So this create a problem in the Syria itself, in the people or the refugees inside the Syria. So these are some factors I focused in this paper. After that,
Excuse me.
yes, ma'am.
Shall we conclude within 1
Yeah,
minute?
sure. So the COVID-19 created a huge impact or a hit on the refugees in the Syria. I include some suggestions like we need to give some medicine to boost the immunities of the refugees, along with the food and other amenities that provided to the refugees. At the same time, we need to give job and financial security to the refugees by the UN or some nation organization. And other one suggestion is that we need to implement a personal identification card or number to the one member of the refugee family, so that he can work in the work or collect is essential for the family itself. These are my suggestions. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Adarsh, for your presentation on Syrian refugees among COVID-19. Thank you. Next, we'll move to the next presentation. We have Nancy Puri and C.R. Ekauri with their presentation on challenges faced by Rohingyas in Bangladesh during the COVID-19 pandemic. So welcome you both. Yes. Miss Nancy.
Nancy, share a screen. Complete a screen you share, then you open PPT. Yes, then you open PPT from the bottom. That go down. Okay. There's PPT there. Share a screen, then open PPT on your screen.
I understand there is some problem for Nancy. Hello. So shall we move to next person? Nancy, yes. It's getting ready, I think.
Nancy, on the taskbar, you can have your presentation. On the taskbar, your presentation is visible.
Otherwise, it's better to go for oral presentation, I think, if there is technical issues altogether.
Nancy, can you hear us?
Hello, Miss Nancy. Can you hear me? Hello.
Nancy?
Is Miss Nancy able to hear me? I think the problem is continuing. We'll move to next presentation then. I think by then Nancy can fix it.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Okay. Yes, Krishna, we'll go for next presentation.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, by then Nancy can fix her problem. And yes, so friends, we are moving to the next presentation. Next we have Ms. Vinisha Yu. She's the research scholar in political science, University of Kerala, Thiruvananthapuram. Her topic is pandemic in Lebanon, double whammy for Palestinian refugees. Welcome, Ms. Vinisha.
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, you are. You can turn on your video also, if you have sufficient bandwidth.
Good afternoon to all. First of all, I express my sincere thanks to the organizers of this seminar for giving me this opportunity. Here, my topic is Pandemic in Lebanon, Double Whammy for Palestinian Refugees. First of all, I start my presentation with a brief introduction of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, then analyze the impact of COVID-19 on their lives. The international world is now witnessing a tremendous increase in the number of forcibly displaced persons. Today, 79.5 million people have been forcibly displaced, of which 26 million are refugees. Refugees are those people who flee from their homeland to escape from war, persecution, violence, human rights violations, conflict, etc. But in many host countries, they are not provided with the security or service they need and are often subjected to human rights violations and conflict. And in addition, this kind of pandemics and natural calamities in host countries make their lives more vulnerable. The COVID-19 pandemic indeed constitutes a severe challenge to the refugee populations around the world. It is a fact that majority of refugees are living in overcrowded refugee camps, which lack basic healthcare facilities and sanitation and hygiene facilities. And another important aspect to note that many low and middle income countries provide asylum to 85% of displaced people. Now, many of these countries are struggling very hard to protect their economy and their citizens from COVID-19 pandemic. So, refugee protection is at stake in many of these countries. The Middle East, a troubled region of the world, has produced and hosted largest number of refugees. Lebanon, a small country in the Middle East, has the highest per capita concentration of refugees in the world. It hosts 1.5 million Syrian refugees, in addition to a large number of Palestinian refugees, which numbered around 450,000. Palestinians in Lebanon have been protracted refugees for over 70 years. And while host countries such as Jordan and Syria granted them citizenship and civil rights, Lebanon does not give them even the basic right to work, education, health, and social security. Moreover, they are living in 12 official refugee camps, which are located in the urban periphery and are facing problems like overcrowding, lack of infrastructure, and poor housing, etc. And so Palestinians are the marginalized and disadvantaged group in Lebanon. Hence, it is significant to analyze the impact of COVID-19 on their lives. The first COVID-19 case was reported in Lebanon on February 21st. An important aspect to note that COVID-19 outbreak in Lebanon is at a time of severe political and economic crisis. Vulnerable groups, including refugees and migrant workers, have been particularly hard hit by this economic crisis. The outbreak of COVID-19 is further exacerbating the current financial crisis and aggravating the vulnerability and humanitarian condition of refugees. Next, let us examine the impact of COVID-19 on the life of Palestinian refugees. First, we have to examine its impact on the livelihood of refugees. Even before the pandemic, there are legal restrictions on the right of Palestinians to work. Many refugees are employed as daily laborers and in informal sectors and have not been able to work due to quarantine and lockdown restrictions. According to Arab Renaissance for Democracy and Development report, 90% of the Palestinians in Lebanon have lost jobs as a result of the pandemic. Palestinian refugees working in all sectors have been affected. They tend to be the first group of employees to be let go of due to lack of labor protection. The loss of livelihood means that many families are struggling to obtain basic necessities and they are facing acute food insecurity as a result of the crisis. These groups typically lack savings and are often ineligible for social security coverage. So job losses adversely affected them. And next impact is on the health system of refugees. Due to the financial crisis and devaluation of Lebanese pound, medical equipment importers for both public and private hospitals in Lebanon began facing difficulties in bringing medical supplies into the country. Moreover, the Beirut explosion of August 4, 2020 also damaged a number of hospitals, affecting their capacity to operate and to assist people injured from the blast as well as COVID-19 patients. In Lebanon, Palestinian refugees as non-citizens cannot access the public healthcare system. So the refugees have experienced obstacles in getting tested for COVID-19 as Lebanese hospitals have been turning away undocumented people. Many of the refugees are unregistered or non-ID refugees. In private hospitals, there is a high cost for testing services and Palestinians cannot afford it. Moreover, Palestinian refugee camps have been excluded from the government sanitation campaign. In this context, we can say that citizens in cases of pandemics are considered as sanitized objects or sanitary objects deserving to survive, whereas non-citizen or refugees were unsanitized and a burden and thus not deserving of treatment. Another important aspect is that the xenophobic discourses remain and intensify even in the time of pandemic also. Several Lebanese officials have called for greater control in refugee camps, places where Palestinians are already under complete surveillance and control. Municipalities across the country have imposed harsher measures on refugees than those placed on Lebanese, including larger curfews and no exception lockdown. There was also an increased risk of stigma against these communities, coupled with the spread of misinformation and rumors of infection among refugees. These restrictions further restrained refugees' ability to access job, cash, or purchase public goods. Another impact is on the education system. Although the educational systems of host countries and United Nations Relief and Work Agency schools have launched an extensive distance learning program for Palestinian refugees, many Palestinian refugees children experience difficulties in continuing their education as e-learning curricula have been difficult to implement in camps due to limited internet and computer access. Another
Vinisha,
most
excuse me,
important
Vinisha.
impact.
Okay.
Okay, now
Can you conclude within 1 minute?
Another impact is on humanitarian services because Palestinians are heavily relied on UNRWA for most of their services. In 2018, also USA cut its financial services to UNRWA. It affected its services, and now many of the donor countries, due to the COVID-19, also are unable to pay their contribution to UNRWA. And to meet the increased needs of beneficiaries during COVID-19 crisis, UNRWA has now launched an emergency flash appeal of 93.4 million. Despite widely circulated campaigns, the UNRWA flash appeal remained underfunded. So my conclusion is that Palestinian refugees who have been living in Lebanon for decades, it remain without any rights. The outbreak of COVID-19 is further contributing to the economic recession, compounding existing weaknesses and vulnerabilities of Palestinian refugees. Palestinian refugees in Lebanon suffer discriminatory legislation and treatment. This discrimination is critical from a public health standpoint. Since the virus is indiscriminate, adopting discriminatory policies increases the risk of further spread of COVID-19 and threatens everyone's health and safety. The spread of this kind of pandemic also raised the need to ensure proper housing and essential services for refugees. Even before the pandemic also, Lebanese government deliberately neglected their responsibility towards Palestinian refugees. Hence, their protection is mainly guaranteed by UNRWA and voluntary organization. So my recommendation is that it's high time to strengthen support for UNRWA, including by fully funding the UNRWA emergency flash appeal for the COVID-19 response to help maintain decent living standards for Palestinian refugees and increase resilience to the future health crisis. With this, I conclude my words. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinisha, for your presentation. Next, we have Nancy Puri and Sierra Kauri with their presentation on the topic Challenges Faced by Rohingyas in Bangladesh during COVID-19 pandemic. So welcome you.
Hello, now am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you, Chair, as well as I would like to thank the technical session team who had helped me to present my paper here. Earlier, I was facing as a technical glitches at that time. So again, thank you so much, Chair, and thank you, the technical team. So firstly, I would like to thank Mahatma Gandhi University, Flame University, and Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism for giving me such a great opportunity to present my paper. So the topic of my paper is Challenges Faced by Rohingyas in Bangladesh during COVID-19 pandemic. So if I start with the introduction one, amongst the world's most heavily persecuted minority communities are the Rohingya people who fled from Myanmar over the decades and currently live in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. About 6 lakhs Rohingyas left Myanmar in 2017 and joined the previously fled 2 lakhs to 3 lakhs Rohingya refugees, making the overall 1 million. Around 65% of them. Hello. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
It's
Okay.
audible. It's audible.
Around 65% of them live in a very overcrowded camps in 5 square miles in hilly areas of Kutupalong. According to various sources, presently this is the world's largest and most densely populated refugee camp. The living condition in the camps is woefully inadequate and unhealthy. The average number of people per household is 4.5. Almost all of them are living in the modest temporary shelters of 14 into 2 size built through bamboo. They have limited access to clean water and sanitation. The majority of Rohingya sleep on a plastic paper spread over the muddy floor in their tents. In this situation, keeping even minimum hygiene is difficult and any contagious virus outbreak has the potential to kill thousands of virus. If I discuss about the month of March, that is 2020, so the coronavirus disease, the 2019 outbreak had substantially affected all over the world, including Bangladesh, where an aggregate of 12,425 confirmed cases was documented as of May 7, 2020. As the COVID 19 condition is growing quickly, the nation state is facing increasing challenges to safeguard preventive measures. Although no confirmed cases have been reported, I mean to say, in the month of March 2020, so far among the Rohingya refugees. Recently, the local transmission of COVID 19 in Bangladesh has changed rapidly with an exponential increase of this disease outbreak country worldwide like to what we have observed in China, Italy, and some other countries. Yes, we can say that that there was a sudden increase of cases even in the month of April and May 2020 as well. So coming on to the if I talk about the April, the month of April, the in the week ending 11th April 2020, the new cases in Bangladesh grew 11,055 cases, the highest in Asia. People all over the world are being advised to stay home, to practice social distancing, and to make hygiene a priority. Such measures are definitely not possible to put into practice in a refugee camp. Importantly, the Rohingya refugees and the Bangladeshi local community are living across the camps, and even it is restricted for local people to enter the camps and for Rohingya people to exit the camp, although by law they are not permitted to do so. These refugee people are in a dire state of stress. Many of them have a range of underlying health conditions and nutritional inadequacies. All these threat considerations may suppress their immune system to fight against COVID 19. And as a result, the current community level transmission of COVID 19 puts them at risk of getting infected. However, if a single case of COVID 19 is detected in Rohingya camps, any interventions aiming to prevent further infections and manage the infected cases would be a mission impossible, as the number of cases might rise to thousand within a insignificant period of time due to close proximity in the camps. If I move on to the next the subtopic, if I can explain that about the challenges in Rohingya refugee camps. In August 2017, Bangladesh saw a massive influx of Rohingya refugees into its territory in Cox's Bazar following their violent persecution by the Myanmar authorities, which the United Nations described as a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. Since then, the district of Cox's Bazar has been home to nearly 9 lakh Rohingya refugees living in extremely harsh, overcrowded, and unhygienic conditions. They continue to survive and live under clouds of distress, constantly burdened with the helplessness of being ripped of their identity, the agony of being stateless, the sadness of having no home to call their own, and the anguish of losing their loved ones. 3 years into the exodus, and yet no agreement has been reached on their peaceful repatriation back to their homeland. However, since early 2020, governments across most nations have imposed lockdowns, shut down business, closed schools, and banned all recreational activities and social gatherings in an attempt to curb the spread of novel coronavirus. In addition to this, mandatory measures like use of thermal scanners in workplaces, prohibition of domestic and international travel, and quarantine period for incoming travelers were enforced by the government of Bangladesh. Unable to implement these measures successfully due to repeated violations of the lockdown, the government resorted to take help from the armed forces to run quarantine centers, provide emergency services, and carry out government provided public health directives within the country. However, a specialized lockdown was levied in Cox's Bazar, which restricted entry into or exit from the district, except for emergency, food, and medical supplies. So now moving on to the next the subtopic, if I explain the high vulnerability of COVID-19 transmission. The literacy level of Rohingya population is very low. Despite being educated by the various aid agencies, they are not able to maintain basic personal hygiene as they have limited access to soaps and water. Hand washing and use of face masks is not a common practice among this high risk of population. Besides, many of them are not aware of the novel coronavirus and its consequences. Humanitarian organizations are facing difficulty spreading information regarding COVID-19 due to internet ban enforced by the government of Bangladesh since September 2019. Limiting access to mobile data and communication in the refugee camps, this blackout has prevented the dissemination of vital information and delivery of updated knowledge of COVID-19 inside the camps, eventually leading to the spread of misinformation and misinterpretation of facts. So if I move on to the next, if I can explain the recommendation that how could be these Rohingyas could follow the measures to combat the spread of the coronavirus. So there are some recommendation through which we can follow, that will be that the government of Bangladesh, with the help of non-governmental organizations and foreign agencies, has taken some initiatives which includes
Excuse me,
providing.
Miss Nancy. Hello.
Yes ma'am, yes ma'am,
Okay.
yes.
Can we conclude within 2 minutes?
Yes, surely, ma'am. Thank you so much. Um, NGOs and various foreign agencies has taken some initiative which includes providing preventive and awareness information about COVID-19 and intensifying hygiene promotion inside the camps. Training programs have been offered to religious leaders, other community leaders, and volunteers to raise awareness among Rohingya refugees. However, the initiatives taken may not be sufficient to overcome the massive challenges of caring for 1 million people under these conditions. Sufficient supplies and aids are required to ensure the availability of basic materials such as masks and soap to prevent the spread of COVID-19. So now if I conclude my topic, I could suggest that whatever finding I had observed during my this research work, that COVID-19 epidemic among the Rohingya refugees in the Bangladesh will be extremely difficult to mitigate. Many of the current interventions such as social distancing, contact tracing and isolation, good hygiene and sophisticated treatment in the ICUs for critical cases will be challenging to implement. However, coronavirus will transmit and how COVID-19 will manifest in such a population with a poor baseline health status and acute malnutrition is simply unknown at present. Beyond preparing now for COVID-19 through specific and sensitive interventions for this population to reduce morbidity and mortality, it is also important to rigorously document what does occur when the epidemic affects such a refugee population so we can learn how to better prepare and respond in similar setting. And it will require the continued commitment of healthcare workers and the refugees themselves to respond to this pandemic. The Rohingya have suffered greatly and may now be on the verge of further suffering unless urgent measures are not taken to protect them from the pandemic. So this was all for my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nancy. Now, this is the end of the presentation in the pre-noon session. We had all the presenters speaking on refugees, forced migrants amid COVID-19, and we got a national, regional, as well as global picture of the session. And definitely it had regional, national, as well as global avenues in connection with forced migration as well as the transnational migration. So thank you and congratulations to all paper presenters. Now we have a Q&A session. Over to Ms. Krishna to manage the Q&A session.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So we have our first question to Faisal Muhammad Saleh Anam. The question is from Professor K.K. Bagchi, North Bengal University, Siliguri. And the question is, how was you inspired to do the study on Lebanon? And sorry, the question is Yemen a democratic country, and how the government needs to intensify its efforts to ameliorate the plight of IDPs during COVID-19 pandemic?
Hello?
Should I repeat the question again, Faisal?
No, that's it. It is clear. Shall I start the answer?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for the Professor Bagshi for these questions. The first one is Yemen is a democratic country. I'm telling that it is a democratic country. And the second question, that's very difficult to say that, because now the government itself, they are living in exile. So they are not, even the president himself, he's not inside the country. Now they are searching for the solutions to come back to the country since 2015, I mean. So very difficult for them to go back. They are now in Saudi Arabia, and they neglect and ignore what is going on the situation related to the displaced people. That's my answer to the questions. Thank you. Hello?
Okay, Faisal. Okay, now we move on to the next question. And the next question is to Miss Vinisha. The question is by Professor K.K. Bagchi again, North Bengal University, Siliguri. How was you inspired to do this study on Lebanon? And what are the sources of your data and information? Vinisha?
Thank you for the question. I am doing research on the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. So I always keep in touch with their problems and issues. As I already discussed in my paper, that they are the most marginalized and disadvantaged group. As when we take the case of Palestinian refugees also, they are the only refugee population who have been deprived of their nationality and the territory of their former state. So I think it's significant to analyze the impact of COVID-19 on their lives. For the presentation, I collect data and information mainly from UNRWA report titled COVID-19 Appeal, December 2020, and World Food Program report, June 2020, and Arab Renaissance for Democracy and Development report, June 2020, and various news reports mainly from BBC and Al Jazeera. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vinisha. Now we have another question to Ms. Vinnie Davis, and that is from Raja Pandey, a research scholar, Jivaji University, Gwalior. How does a country like India decide the limits between helping other countries and their own national interest in the present crisis of the pandemic of COVID-19?
Thank you for the question. That was indeed an interesting one. Providing developmental assistance has always been a very important aspect in Indian foreign policy. It's like Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam, the world as one family. So in spite of the fact that India is crippled with this crisis, in spite of the fact that our resilience to this pandemic is a concern right now because of our demographics, there has been instances when India has decided to provide developmental assistance. Now, very specifically, if you I could tell the case of South Asia. So the South Asia's the SARC COVID emergency fund was launched. $10 million was pledged, and within that, sometimes as a responsible player in the South Asian region, we would also have to try to protect the smaller South Asian states. We have a lot of low middle income states like Maldives, Bhutan, Nepal, everyone. So in all these instances, we are seeing the situation wherein India is trying to be a responsible player in terms of providing medical supplies, food supplies, and other assistances. We also saw an instance when India has pledged again to the UN relief works agencies for the cause of Palestinian refugees. So all these are instances wherein the nations try to project themselves as a responsible global player during such crises.
Yeah, so thank you all paper presenters. So as we all understand, all the presentations were exactly thematic to this particular theme of our international webinar. Especially focusing on refugees, forced migrants, as well as asylum seekers in the midst of COVID-19. I do appreciate for your presentations and deliberating on the thoughts of these vulnerable group of communities, and whom we understand that their hardships have been doubled or tripled in the midst of COVID-19. As I have mentioned in the inaugural session, in the keynote session, the kinds of vulnerability with which they are associated with in a pre-COVID era has been aggravated due to the COVID pandemic. And there need to be, as the paper presenters have rightly mentioned, as well as our keynote speakers have rightly pointed out, there need to be more policy making as well as more policies in order to address the issues concerned with these vulnerable group of communities. And things have been aggravated due to COVID-19 pandemic, and there must be more research in this field. Definitely, we hope that there will be more policy orientations as well as policies globally as well as nationally in order to make their lives more secure and safe in the midst of these hardships. So once again, let me congratulate all the paper presenters and the organizers. So it is time to conclude our pre-noon session. So first of all, let me express my happiness to be the part of this program. Thank you, organizers, for having me here. Now we'll go for an official vote of thanks. Thank you once again. Over to Ms. Krishna.
Thank you, ma'am. So now we've come to the end of the session. It is of immense pleasure for me to thank all the participants for their efforts and for their participations. I also like to thank Dr. Shahina Moleke for systematically and cordially coordinating the session with such ease. A big thanks to all the attendees for your presence and participation in the session. It has made it more interactive and informative. I also thank the technical session for taking care of all the technicalities for the smooth run of the session. So thank you, everyone. Also, the next session will commence from 4 p.m. onwards, and the valedictory session at 6 p.m. by Professor S. Irudayarajan. Thank you.